No, no, not really. I think I'll be very surprised if you've asked me something I haven't been asked before. So
Alrighty, well,
yeah,
challenge
challenge
accepted,
accepted.
mate.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, welcome to the show, Dennis. It's a pleasure to have you here. Today, we're basically going to be diving deep into the world of Savic motorcycles, electric vehicles, and the like. But before we get into that, I'd love to, play the tape back and get into who Dennis Savic is. Get into your upbringing. I know you grew up in
Oh yeah,
Perth. Were you born over
yeah,
in Perth
yeah.
or?
No, so my parents immigrated to Australia in
Mhm.
'89-ish, and then they landed in Sydney. So I was born in Sydney.
Yep.
And then when I was quite young, they thought that was a bit too busy for them and they moved over to Perth. And so I grew up and did my schooling there. And then I moved to Melbourne to work in auto and start the business. And
Mhm.
kind of at that time, my sister moved to Brizzy for work. So at one stage, we were just all over.
All over the shop.
Yeah, yeah.
Your
But yeah,
folks
so
moved from, was it then the former Yugoslavia at the time? I suppose.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes. And both my parents from Sarajevo or
Uh-huh.
Sarajevo.
Yeah.
Um,
So for the
depending how you pronounce it.
uninitiated, I suppose, modern day Bosnia.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well and truly.
Well and truly. Well, so okay, so you moved over to Melbourne to get into the auto industry. I know you spent some time working at Ford, but
Yep.
you became a mechanical engineer. So what was the inspiration to pursue that line of work?
So I was I think I was a pretty weird kid generally, but I think it was a pretty weird thing for a
Is there such a
14 year
thing
old.
as a not weird kid, as
A
a normal
normal
kid?
kid. Yeah, what is normal? I mean, we can
Yeah,
go down that rabbit hole.
exactly.
Um, so like so I wanted to build a motorbike when I was a teenager,
Uh-huh.
right? And I was in a metalwork class in school, and I thought this is the perfect opportunity. I've got access to a welder.
Yep.
I've got some sketches. I've got a little bit of cash. I can build a motorbike. And the teacher basically laughed at me, said, "There's no way I'm letting you do that. There's no way I'm helping you. You need to be an engineer." And I was like, "Oh, okay. I'll be an engineer then."
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of what set me on the engineering pathway. And
Nice one.
um,
It's
yeah,
interesting. My 10 or 11 teacher told me I should really pursue journalism because apparently I was great at writing, and I didn't listen to them. But in my 30s, I found myself writing books. So it took me
oh
over a
wow,
decade to get down that track. Whereas you did
that's
the right
cool.
thing and you listened to your teacher, and it seems to be taking you on the right path. But given that you wanted to build motorbikes, were you riding at the time? Did you like get into dirt bikes and stuff as a kid?
No, man, like I was definitely a black sheep in the family,
Uh-huh.
like I didn't have like dad had the basic tools at home, but we didn't have a workshop or anything. There was no motorbike in our family history or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's just this weird thing that, when I told my parents I wanted to study engineering, of course, they were like really happy about that, right?
Yeah.
Um, being of European descent,
Of
it's like
course.
you're either a doctor or an engineer or something. And when mum asked me, why did you, decide you wanted to do engineering? I said, because I want to build my own automotive business one day. And she kind of went, that's pretty weird, but that's fine. I'll accept that. She didn't say that. She's like, oh, okay. I could just, you could see it on her face. Um, and so, it came out of nowhere. Granddad was an electrical engineer who worked in like, heavy industry. Mum's a
Mhm.
structural engineer who worked in oil and gas. Dad was in IT. And I grew up building computers and stuff and watching him build computers and,
Mhm.
install Windows 95 for clients and all kinds of stuff. So
Yeah.
it was like, maybe there was a little bit of everything
Yeah.
that kind of came together. But in terms of motorbikes, like, yeah, I had to lie my way into, owning my first one. I told my mum I was just holding it for a mate for a while, and I bought it, and it was just, yeah. After about 6 months, she kind of turned to me. She goes,
Uh,
"That's your bike, isn't it?" I was like, "Yeah, yeah." So
yeah.
she just kind of accepted that I just wasn't going to stop.
That's funny.
And
I actually
yeah,
have a close friend who is Serbian, and he bought an R1. This is probably
mm,
10, 12 years ago when he was in his mid 20s. and he stored it at a friend's place because there's no way he was bringing that baby home. And
I think I know who you're talking about.
oh, do you? We'll talk the name off air, but
Yeah.
he eventually had an accident, just being an idiot and monoing with no protective gear on. You know, no major damage, but basically that was the end of his time as a motorcyclist. And I don't think his parents know to this day that he ever owned a motorbike. So
yeah, I don't know. I might have to ask him over dinner tonight.
Classic. So fast forward to 2016. That's more or less when the seed for Savic Motorcycles was planted. The company was officially founded around then. And just to like give people a bit of context, nowadays electric vehicles, you see a Tesla Model 3 or Model S or Model Y all over the shop. But 2016, there wasn't much around. I think Tesla had just opened up its dealerships in Melbourne and Sydney, its showrooms rather. And it was still very, very new. There were no charging stations around. So for you to start Savic back in 2016, was it always an electric motorcycle company even then?
Yeah. So it actually started a bit earlier.
Okay.
So and just to add to the context, this is back before Rimac or Rimac was, they were still at prototype stage. So I've followed their journey for a long time. But so I graduated uni end of 14, and I took 2 weeks off and basically sat in front of the TV for a couple of weeks and just played Grand Theft Auto. I think the new one came out at that stage. And then I realized, oh, hang on, I wanted to build an automotive business. So I started building bikes 2015, like January 2015, and started networking, sold my own car to, fund buying parts and things like that. And then, we registered the business back end of 2016 in preparation and the hopes that after we launched publicly, with an event that people and investors would just throw money at us, right? So we needed a company structure to accept everybody's generosity and willingness to invest.
The naivety of a first time.
Oh man, I was like, oh, this is going to be crazy. So the slog really started at that point. Well, no, like I'd worked pretty hard all through 15 and 2016. I had a day job. And worked in an office during the day, got out the suit, put on the steel caps, and went straight to the workshop from 4 till midnight or 2 a.m.
Because you worked for Ford, Bremer, and was it Legendneering up until about 2019, right? So Savic was a side hustle up until that point.
Yeah. So while I was still so I started doing bikes when I was still in WA, and then I decided that I needed to work in auto in 2017, so mid 2017. So by the end of 2017, I was over in Melbourne working for Bremer Automation, who are an awesome company. I had Brett and the guys there were really good to work with. And, they knew I was building this thing and they knew what I wanted to do. So they were kind enough to, give me 10 square meters in the corner of the workshop just to like store the bike and then pull it out to work on and put it back. And so then through 2018, I built like the MVP, if you will, the minimum viable product of what is now the C-series. And it was off the shelf components. I did manage to scrape together like 70 grand from friends and family to invest in the business, and that funded that build. And so that was 2018. I built that, and I think it was like April 2018 I started working for Ford. So in the process of moving over to Melbourne, I met an engineering manager at Ford, who also happened to be a mad keen motorcyclist, and I was working on like advanced analysis and generative design and things like that, and he wanted to bring that into the Ford business, and so he kind of brought me in under something else and told me to work on this in the back. It was super unorthodox, like my I probably shouldn't disclose too much more so no one gets in trouble, but I I loved working for Ford. So I was at Ford for a few years after that.
So, but that was nothing to do with Ford, because this is something that many corporates try to do when it comes to innovation. Like they'll have some more innovative people that work for them. They'll give them a bit of money and a bit of time. They might take a small amount of equity and then eventually they'll spin them out. Whereas in this case, it was like, no, you just have some time and space and do what you want for X amount of hours a week.
Well, I had to do a particular role, to fulfill that role and the gap in his team. And then it was kind of up to me after hours to self-teach myself this tech.
Right.
And then do side projects for people. And then I demonstrated a business model, and then it made its way up to the engineering director, who then, I basically, by the time I left Ford, we had a team of people doing this,
Nice.
this work. So it was, I had such a good time there. And it was like, I think it's pretty rare for that to happen in such a large organization. You have to really have the right people in every layer of management bought into something happening to progress something like that. And it was a really good experience, in terms of like big corporate type organizations and bureaucracy and politics. And
I imagine you're probably moving a lot faster though now without the big corporate bureaucracy and politics.
Decision making is easier for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, fast forward to today, you've basically launched your C-series cafe racer motorcycle, beautiful looking bike. And I don't know if these numbers are up to date, but I'm sure you can correct me. So you've basically got pre-orders equating to over 6 million in revenue, over 250 customers. And you're currently doing a crowdfunding campaign with Equitise, where you're basically raising up to $2 million at a $20 million valuation. And you're starting to ship motorbikes this year, right? Have you already started shipping them?
Correct. We haven't. We're in pilot production now. So we have 7 bikes worth of parts in the factory, and the first 5, some of those are for marketing, some of those are for the final engineering testing that we're doing. And the last 2 are going to be the first 2 customer vehicles. So if all goes to plan, we should be able to deliver those kind of back end of July is in the current schedule. And by that, at the same time, we'll be ready to start placing orders for our first serial production batch or batch of serial production vehicles. So those first vehicles we have scheduled to go out to customers October, back end of October. So that is really exciting. Like we've been at this for a long time. We've had 4 million of investments so far, of equity investment to get to where we are. And
I saw
all our compliances
invested as well through that energy fund. Yep.
They did. They have been so supportive of what we're doing. It's awesome. We've now got a pretty good network of high net worth, who, and that's steadily growing. And I think the opportunity for more investment is increasing in parallel with, the number of milestones we hit and how much the business matures. Like, raising capital 12, 18 months ago for us was really, really difficult. And hopefully it becomes easier once we've started delivering product and, we start trending towards our profitability targets and things like that. So it's exciting times.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you're in I wouldn't say a league of your own completely, but as a company that's still in its, early stages, to have generated over 6 million in revenue, it differentiates you from all of the slideware and companies that, we've got this pilot here, they generated 10 grand. Like that's, you're talking real money there.
I want to, I've got to make sure I'm completely clear about that. That's future revenue. We haven't accepted all of that in sale and paid tax on it and things like that. It's pre-orders. So we're up to 260 pre-orders now, and most of those have put down $2,000 as a deposit. And we don't want to ask for any more until we are ready to start producing those people's bikes, because that just doesn't feel right to me. Like, and you might say it's bad business or, try and get more earlier, but I don't know. To me, like that sounds reasonable warning. And So, and all of our customers are pretty happy with that. And so depending on if our first batch is 15 or 25, in July is when we'll start taking the progress payments for those 25. So we've got a bit of a drawn out sales process that's, pretty reasonable, and most customers, are happy with it. But from that progress payment, the orders become non-refundable because we start ordering those parts and what have you,
Yep.
and then the balance is due prior to delivery. So it's working pretty well.
But it's also probably a good psychological sales tactic whereby it's much easier to commit to, $2,000 than, because the bike costs just under 20 grand. So you commit that 2 grand, you're locked in, then psychologically you feel like you've already committed. So then you're more likely to follow through and pay the rest of it and get your bike as
yeah. I think like for us, and when you put it that way, it does make sense. I guess I never really thought of it that way. For me, it was more about what's a reasonable commitment from a customer that an investor will also perceive as a reasonable commitment, because we need customers and we need investors. Customers basically want us to have built bikes or what have you, and investors, like, they kind of need each other. It's a catch-22. It's just a standard, startup thing. So that kind of payment structure just helps us toe that line a little bit better.
Absolutely. And so you received over 900 expressions of interest to your crowdfunding campaign in the very first week. Like I said, you're raising up to $2 million, $20 million pre-money valuation. People can get in for as little as $500. So what's the next sort of tranche of funding going to be used for?
So, well, actually, we're up to, I checked this morning, we're up to 1,500 expressions of interest, which is beautiful. Just awesome. It blew my mind. So yeah, we're really, really happy with that. I think we've gone live this morning to the public. So up until now, it was just VIPs only. And we hit our minimum within a day and a half or a couple of days or something. And I think we're sitting at, maybe mid 600s now, roughly. So that's pretty good, and it's trending pretty well. In terms of what it's used for, because we've built the product, engineering's pretty much finished. All our compliances are done. The capital that we're raising now is for working capital and inventory. That's basically what we need to do, because, we've gone out to every single possible VC in Australia, and the difficulty we've got is that we're not really a VC business, traditionally speaking. We're not going to have 100x ROI in 2 years. We're not B2B SaaS. And so, and it's also in automotive, which is a very niche investment space, especially in Australia. I've just come back from the Middle East recently, and the flavor for our business over there was just wildly different. It was very nice. It was a very pleasant change from like, why are you doing this? And, when are you going to have bikes? And they're just like, yeah, let's do this. And, when can we invest? It's just, bizarre. So yeah, basically the crowdsource funding will get us to a point where we've demonstrated that we can produce and deliver vehicles to customers, and we can progress towards our, like I said, profitability targets. It's not going to be enough for us to become a self-sustaining business. But the strategy is that we'll use that, we'll hit those extra milestones, we'll go back out to the investment market, having, being much more mature and de-risking the investment quite a lot from the investor's perspective, and then raise more and keep going.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And unless you're a zero marginal cost software business, it's hard to get the interest of early stage VCs here in Australia. So earlier you did say, back in 2018, you built your MVP. I think you debuted that at the Melbourne Moto Expo.
Yeah.
So,
done your research.
I'm well researched, mate. So
man.
In the world of, software, MVPs typically are used to validate or get closer to product market fit. Now, I guess in the world of electric vehicles or motorbikes, it's not that you're validating whether there's a market for this as such, because there are numerous analogs out there. So what is the purpose of an MVP in that case?
Yeah, so for us, it was a bit to validate product market fit a little
Okay.
bit as well. Yeah, because we had an event and we kind of launched as, an old brand in 2016 that I never really liked, but at that point, I wasn't prepared to put my name behind it, and I was like, it's still too early. I'm not sure. What are people going to think and all this kind of stuff. And then
Yeah.
through 2018, I was like, nah, bugger it. I'm gonna put my name on this. And that's actually what attracted artisan, believe it or not, someone who's crazy enough to risk serious reputational damage by putting their name behind something.
Yeah.
So for us launching, I call it an MVP because when we launched in 2018, we made the Facebook page like the night before the launch. We didn't really have a website. Like I threw something together in Shopify. I'm pretty sure that maybe we didn't even have a website. I can't remember now. I can't remember if it was 18 or 19. We did that the night before the launch. Anyways, within 3 days of us unveiling the bike, we had articles coming out in Germany, in Spain, in France, and I was like, what the, we had, and our pre-order forms were printed A5 pieces of paper at the event.
Yeah.
There was no like automated system and any of that stuff that we've got now. So we ended up getting like 12 pre-orders at that event over the weekend. We were like, holy shit, like people actually want this and think it's cool. And and the bike that we launched looked really, really cool, but there was about 40 fundamental things that we had to change about it. And one of the things that, from an engineering perspective, we realized after we built that bike was that we needed to engineer our own powertrain. Like at that point, we were still using an off-the-shelf powertrain. So our hypothesis when we started was buy off-the-shelf parts, put them in a bike, and then sell it as a product.
Yeah.
But the motors we were getting and the batteries we were getting and the inverter we were getting, they just performance-wise went up to scratch, quality-wise went up to scratch, and then reliability was terrible as well. And that's after testing the 2018 bike on Melbourne streets and seeing how it performed and what have you. And then on top of that, the seat was far too narrow. The tank wasn't the right shape. Like there was just all these learnings that have happened. So we've built prototypes. So we've built iterations in 2016, 18, 19, 20, and then 22, we built 2 bikes that were basically the production things out of machine, like billet machine. So out of every iteration, there's probably been like 250 lessons learned or more. And then like in the earlier revisions, there was like very fundamental changes to the architecture or the design that needed to happen to refine the product. And so we've got a list of so we've built, the first pilot production vehicle now. We're building the second, will be built over the next couple of days, might even be finished today. And then the third starts getting built later this week. And even from the first pilot production vehicle, we've got about like 80 things we need to fix, but they're like, surface specifications and gloss finish, just in our wildest dreams, did we never think we'd get to a point where we're like, okay, you need to make sure this has 12% gloss in it and, within 1 or 2% tolerance, and then be able to reject a part if it doesn't meet that standard. So, for a very lean team, we've come a long way, and we do operate like, a larger OEM to some degree.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say. I mean, talking about media and debuting your bike and publications abroad, covering it as far flung as Germany and whatnot, that can be a great source of motivation. It's not necessarily always validation though, because sometimes media just wants something to report to get traffic and sell ads. And
For sure.
I remember my first startup back in 2012, put it out there, got the media's attention somehow. The Australian covered it, got some seed, not even seed funding, it was pre-seed, but I don't think it was ever really the best idea in the world. And, I pursued that for a couple of years, didn't really work out, but it was a great source of motivation all the same. So just an interesting one there. But
you
To
learn so much through the process though. Like it doesn't really matter what you do. If
absolutely.
you start something and stick with it for a couple of years, you're a wildly different person on the other side of that.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, in that case, I kind of evolved from that to another project that, took off. And if I hadn't
Right.
gotten that initial funding and that freedom to pursue that for 2 years, I
Yeah.
probably would have stayed in the corporate world and never really, 10
Yeah,
years later,
man.
here I am still, an entrepreneur. So it's funny how
Yeah.
things don't work out, but
Yeah.
kind of do in retrospect.
Yeah. There's like I do quite a lot of like reading and learning about personality and
Mhm.
like all the other psychological stuff that's required
Yeah.
with starting and running a business. And one thing that I found really interesting is, which aligned what my mom used to say to me, I'll never admit that to her though, was that if you don't know what to do, just do something. Just pick something and do it, because if you don't do anything, then you're not going to be progressing. And
Yeah.
at the very least, you'll realize that that something isn't what you want to be doing. But you might meet someone, or you might read something that just and go, oh, maybe that's what I want to do, and then you start working towards that. And yeah, just do it. Really, just the
Absolutely.
Nike slogan.
Yeah, no, it's something I like to tell people because I work with a lot of entrepreneurs and especially early stage founders who are thinking about pursuing something. And it's like, mate, you're not going to know which exit to take on the freeway until your car is driving on it. Like just drive and the exits will present themselves over time. And the more, kilometers you clock up, the
Yeah,
more information you'll have to make a more informed decision, which exit you want to take. So otherwise, if you stand still in the garage, you're not going
100%.
to know anything. So,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
so you did mention that you've got all this backlog of fixes that you want to make, some of them, surface level things like 12% gloss and whatnot. But you did say that there were certain
Yeah,
parts that
yeah,
weren't quite up to scratch. And you wanted to you started manufacturing
yeah,
those yourself. That's kind of reminiscent of what Elon did with SpaceX, where he was able to bring down the cost of manufacturing, say, a rocket by bringing in house a lot of the manufacturing of
yeah,
parts.
yeah, yeah, for sure. It's we have, there are some situations where we've developed things by choice.
Mm-hmm.
Also, most of our bike we have developed in-house by necessity, because the most commonly known suspension suppliers that we engage to supply really good suspension for us were wanting to charge us like $3,000 per set of forks. And in what world does that give us a profitable business model where we can say, okay, we'll order 50 now and the next order will be bigger? It's like, well, that's just not going to work for us. So we had to go down the road of developing our own suspension, which works out really well because it's specific to our bike. It means it performs, way better. And it costs us 3 to 4 times less to, have that part on the car. I think, I don't know if this is part of Tesla's strategy or not, but something I noticed on their car is they have Tesla branded brake calipers. And the first thing that comes to my mind, having been on the journey that I've been on, is like, I bet you that they realized that they could get those for the cost of aluminium rather than paying premium for someone else's brand.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some of that. But then developing it yourself gives you a lot more freedom. It does delay getting product to customers, but our customers are just, we have a really good customer base that is super understanding. So yeah, you've just got to juggle all that.
Absolutely. And I mean, speaking of production systems, if we go back to the start of the 20th century, the Ford production system that Henry Ford popularized, basically, yeah, it was a massive differentiator for their business. They were able to pump out way more cars than competitors and basically flood the market. Now, reading your website, you basically say that you've developed a lean, adaptable vehicle production platform, which kind of dovetails into perhaps what we were just talking about, but can you just shed a little bit more light on that?
Completely.
Sorry, mate. I think I lost you. Maybe we'll turn the video off and we'll see if that
Sorry,
helps.
man. My yeah, I had to switch to hotspotting. I think everybody's in the office now, and chewing up
Yeah.
the bandwidth.
Maybe, yeah, let's see if that works better. Hello, testing.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that sounds a bit better. So let me just repeat that question.
Yeah, sure.
So going back to, the start of the 20th century, Henry Ford and the Ford production system basically revolutionized, mass mass manufacturing and distribution of cars. They were able to flood the market with lots of vehicles. It was basically a game changer for them. Now, you say that you've developed a lean, adaptable vehicle production platform. What does that basically look like?
So, like our production process at the moment, because we're pretty low volume, is what's called a cell-based assembly. So the bikes are static, and the assembly technicians move around the bike. Whereas, the traditional Ford production line is, vehicles are moving and people are stationary, which makes a lot of sense. But I think one thing that we're alluding to there is the platform. So the C-series, that the product that we've brought to market is built on what we call the SM1 platform. And we call it a platform because it's a modular structural architecture. So our front frame bolts onto the powertrain at the front, and our rear frames bolt onto the battery and the powertrain at the rear. The motor bolts on at the rear. So if we want to change the style of bike or bring out a new product for a different market segment, we only need to change a couple of frames and maybe a suspension system and add new bodywork, and we can have an entirely different product line that suits an entirely different market segment. So that way you amortize your R&D costs across greater market segments and maximize future potential revenue. So I think that's more of what we're alluding to with that. Production
Nice. And you did touch on something earlier around having to buy, like a minimum order quantity of product from, from potential manufacturers and whatnot, which is a challenge for a lot of early stage companies, in this kind of a space. I mean, how have you managed to navigate those waters aside from just bringing the manufacture of every part you need in-house?
Yeah, so for a long time, supply chain was the bane of my existence. And, I would probably argue that building a good supply chain is maybe not equally as hard as the engineering that goes into designing the product. But it might be 70% of the way there, because all it takes is for one supplier to not deliver on time or give you the wrong thing or what have you, and it just throws everything out the window. And we now have a team in India and a team in China that are on the ground, work. I don't want to say monitor suppliers, because I like to think that we have a really good working relationship with our suppliers. And the best suppliers we have are ones that are communicative, let us know about problems before they come up or as they're coming up, and we work together to solve them. So I'm very comfortable, and the team are very comfortable in the supply base that we currently have. We've got great relationships with everybody. We've got the right contracts in place. We've got the right pricing. But that took, years and probably hundreds of thousands of dollars to put in place.
Wow. Yeah, I guess it's one of those things where you can only move as fast as what's in front of you, and you might have fast decision-making processes internally and you just want to execute. But if you can't get access to the parts you need to build, then you're not going to move very quickly.
Well, do you know the Tesla story? I think it was pretty public, and there was articles on it, but production was delayed because they couldn't get a $5 USB port or something.
Oh wow.
It only takes one component in a in a collection of, we've got 350 individual components in our bikes, to not be in the factory to cease production. So the supply chain team have to be all over that.
Absolutely, man. And I mean, aside from building an efficient, streamlined supply chain process, I guess the other big challenge that companies in your field have is talent acquisition,
Yeah.
particularly, hiring top engineering and design talent. How have you found that, particularly here in Australia?
One of the reasons why I moved to Melbourne was not just to work in auto, but um, you know, to access that automotive talent that is here. So,
Mhm.
we're in one of the, I guess, as far as automotive development goes and talent quality goes, probably one of the best cities in the world. Like Melbourne is or was the automotive center of Australia, and there are so many smart people here, like, way smarter than I am. And fortunately, I think that because we have quite an aspirational product, quite a cool product, quite a niche product, um, people approach us all the time, saying they would love to be a part of it and they'd love to work with us. And I don't even have the capacity to respond to some of the inquiries that we get because there's so many. The real challenge that we have, and it's a great problem to have, is, well, how do you pick the right people to join the team? Because it takes just one person that's not a good fit to bring down productivity and bring down the culture and the mood.
Yep.
And so we have a very, very drawn out hiring process. We don't hire just anybody. But what that's resulted in is we have an awesome culture. Like, people love coming to work. They love being at work. They feel like it's fun, even though everybody's super productive and talented. So yeah, I think as long as we can maintain those kind of hiring strategies, I think we'll be fine. But yeah,
Yeah.
we're lucky. Sourcing talent for us isn't really a big issue.
So there's no sleeping on the factory room floor until 4 a.m. and waking up and getting back to work, is there, Dennis?
Oh, I've definitely been there. Yeah, like I think 2018 there was probably 2 or 3 months of that.
Hmm. Wow.
Because I was doing everything myself, and then 2019 there was 2 weeks of that, and then by 2020 there was maybe only a couple of like all-nighters in there, pre-launch. So we've slowly gotten better with time and learned our lessons, but no doubt when you start ramping up production and start scaling, there's going to be situations where, yeah, you have to be there, and there are bloody long hours, and it doesn't matter if you work for a small company like us or a Ford or a Tesla. Like, the production staff are key to the operation, along with everybody else. But they work freaking hard, man, and they need to, and you just need to make sure as that the management reward them accordingly. So, but yeah, I quite like to be in the trenches with people. Like,
Hmm.
when we do marketing events and things like that, I've just come back from one in Sydney. I didn't need to be there, but I like to go to experience what our team's experiencing, to see if the level of effort that they put in justifies the outcome that the business receives. And if that is kind of off, then I can, I have the the emotional substance to support the decision making to cancel that or do it.
Yeah.
And so when production really starts ramping up, yeah, I'm going to be on the factory floor swinging spanners,
Hmm.
probably much to our assembly technicians,
Dismay.
dismay. But I think it's necessary as a leader to really experience what your team's experiencing, and adjust things accordingly, because I don't know, that's just the way I like to lead. Whether it's right or not, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it seems to be working for you thus far. And I think when it comes to talent acquisition, and like you said, finding the right, or attracting talent rather, isn't difficult. It's trying to pick who should actually join the organization because you want to maintain a certain type of culture. But this is
Yeah, that's right.
reminiscent of a conversation I had on the podcast last week, which was more or less about the space industry and how when you're building tangible things, whether it's rockets, whether it's electric vehicles. It's a tangible thing. You can touch it, you can see it, you can feel it. In the case of motorbikes, you can ride them. And that perhaps is more inspiring to, would-be engineers and designers and whatnot than perhaps working for another software startup. It's just sexier. And I'm sure that doesn't hurt when it comes to the talent acquisition question.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I'm not going to say it's sexier or not. I think it really depends on people's interest, but it definitely is different, and maybe that gives it its appeal. But I think one thing that's pretty cool is, and this is by no means a requirement when it comes to hiring people, but most people that work in our business ride bikes and love bikes. Like our content creator, he didn't own a car until he was like mid-20s, because he just rode his bike everywhere and didn't want a car, and he got one out of necessity. So people that have that kind of raw passion for bikes and then bring some other passion as well, and then they kind of combine those and join our business, and we try and facilitate their growth and stuff. It's just a really nice tasting cocktail, I suppose.
Absolutely. And I think, hiring people who are actually motorcycle riders is probably half the battle in some respects, because it means that you're going to be more passionate about the work. But in terms of the target sort of demographic, I kind of think back to this classic story of Honda and the Honda Super Cub, which was just a tiny little bike that it was successful in Japan. They launched it in the US, and it was basically crickets. And I think initially they were trying to sell it to just your big, cruiser market over in the States. People that were buying and riding Harleys had no interest in these little Super Cubs.
No, shocking.
Absolutely, shocking. Who would have thought? But it wasn't until they kind of changed the strategy. They struck a deal with sporting goods retailers and marketed these bikes at basically like day-to-day run-around consumers, recreational riders in the urban areas, and it took off. And I imagine that the Savic motorcycle bike that you guys are launching, sorry, the name, I had it here a second ago.
The C-series.
The C-series. I don't imagine you're targeting big, burly, leather-clad Harley riders with this one.
Look, so we didn't really set specific targets on who we would target, and maybe we did in the early days, like very early days. Like when we first started, we were like, only techie people are probably going to look at buying this. It's probably people that work in IT or things like that. And it's like our first customer is a farmer who happens to be passionate about EVs. Our second customer is a lifelong Harley rider.
There goes my theory.
Yeah. Oh, look, me too. Like it totally shocking. And there's I don't know what percentage, but there are a number of customers that we've got that are lifelong Harley riders. And that's not to say, they don't like Harley anymore and they're coming to us or anything like that. They, they've just happened to have ridden a Harley and loved the Harley for the last 30 years. And, they might start getting on now. And one, they love our design, which is, really flattering. We've put a lot of time and passion into it. And they love that it's quiet and smooth and electric. And the C-series has very classical design cues. It's kind of like a retro mod type production vehicle where the cafe racer comes from back in the 60s and the 70s. And we've taken those styling cues and then kind of futurized it with electric vehicle tech and then some sharper lines in some areas. So it's like a crisp version of that. And so and they just absolutely love it. And it just happens that they happen to, be lifelong Harley riders. And, I won't comment on them being big and burly because some certainly aren't. But there's probably a couple of those in there. And that's just a stereotype from back in the day. Yeah.
So you did mention that some people love that the bikes are quiet. Now there's another demographic of riders that want their bikes to be loud just because of the safety aspect. So, I mean, does the bike make any noise or is it as quiet as a Tesla?
Look, it does. It's louder than a Tesla, I would say.
Okay.
And I think that's because it's belt driven. So there is a whir from the motor. You can hear the tire noise on the road, just like you can a Tesla.
Mhm.
But because it's belt driven, you can actually hear the belt noise quite crisply. And I think Teslas are quieter because they're obviously gears meshing and things like that. It's much tighter tolerances and things like that. So you actually do get this like very futuristic acceleration that is very audible to the rider, um, and is audible to people as you pass them, but it's obviously very quiet at 10, 15 meters away.
Yeah.
So there is noise, and a lot of people think that because I started this business, I hate noise and what have you. But like I love the sound of a V8. Like one of my favorite cars is a '69 Mustang and a
Yep.
'59 300 SL Mercedes, and I love the sound that the Porsches make going around the track. But I also it's probably it's a personal thing as well and what you prefer, but the way that I enjoy riding a motorcycle the most is, and it's not very social. I love being by myself, and I
Mhm.
love going for a half an hour to an hour ride up and down the coast and looking out at the ocean as I ride and just enjoying that. And the silence of an EV just adds to that serenity and bliss that I personally experience, and I love that.
Mm.
And then one selling point is that wives absolutely love that it's quiet as well, because when you leave home, you don't wake up the neighbors, you don't wake up, your own family as you leave home on this loud bike. And I've got nothing against loud bikes or loud pipes or anything like that. I just like being quiet more. That's
Yeah,
just my
and
personal
that's
preference.
that's
Yeah.
definitely a personal preference. And I mean,
Yeah.
I drive a Tesla, which is quiet, and I did up until about cycle.
Yeah.
I replaced the pipes on just so it would be louder because it was nice to on this bike where you actually feel and hear everything as you're
Yeah,
riding down the coast.
for sure.
But it is definitely a personal preference. But
Yeah.
on the EV motorcycle market, there's a number of competitors out there. Some of the, I suppose, better known ones that I'm aware of are Zero, Livewire, Evoke.
Mhm.
How do you think about Savic in terms of, is it like differentiated in any key ways, or do you just think that the pie is big enough for multiple ships to basically go ashore?
Yeah, yeah. Look, I think I would probably argue that the pie is big enough.
Mhm.
But there are also a couple of ways that we do try and differentiate ourselves. So one is on style and design,
Mhm.
and we think we have something that looks quite different. And the other one is price. We have a direct customer model, just like the Tesla model, and relative to our direct competition, we're normally about 30% cheaper or slightly more. And that, you know, a lot of investors, think or have commented in the past, not actually our current shareholders, but potential investors have
Mhm.
commented saying, oh, it's too cheap, you need to increase the price or what have you. But when you look at our indirect competitors, so the petrol bikes that we want to compete against, we're actually quite a premium product, and we like to think of it as premium mass market. And all of the feedback that we've had from the market itself, from journalists, from customers, from people who are potential customers, think our price is absolutely spot on. I mean, even I can't name names or organizations, but higher ups in the industry that work in the motorcycle retail space have commented saying your price is bang on. If you can actually deliver for that profitably,
Yep.
you've solved the problem. Because the problem is the cost of producing these things is so much higher than the cost of producing a combustion motorcycle.
Mm.
And that's because of the battery technology, the power electronics. They're just, by the nature of physics, more expensive per kilo to produce. And I can't go into details on different systems and what have you, but when you plug that higher cost starting point into the traditional distribution model, you basically end up with the retail prices that we're seeing in the market already when it comes to the Energica, the Livewire, the Damon, and so on and so forth. And so that's our hypothesis. We can't see behind the curtains with other organizations, but it seems to be the case, and it seems to be working. And so there's two ways we compete. One is design and the other is price.
Yeah. And so on competing on design, Dennis, typically when it comes to technical skill sets, whether it's software engineering, whether it's mechanical engineering, there's often this tension between the technical side and the aesthetic side. And oftentimes people who have, I suppose, great technical skills, oftentimes drop the ball when it comes to making things look pretty. That's definitely not the case with you guys, but have you always had an eye for aesthetics, or have you brought people in to basically complement your skill set with that?
Okay, so this was a bit of a journey. So after my engineering degree, I actually wanted to move to Germany and study transportation design. Like, I'm personally quite passionate. I like to think of myself as, a quasi creative type person. But I'm an engineer by training, and I've got OCD up to the eyeballs, and everything needs to be structured in my life. So that probably hinders my creative, capacity to some degree. But, even though I had that passion and I love drawing and things like that, I realized quite early on that, I've just trained as an engineer for 4 or 5 years, and I did an MBA pretty soon after as well in corporate finance, and I realized it was probably going to take me a few years of just designing to develop the skill set to design this thing properly. And coincidentally, my uncle's cousin, who is an interior architect by trade, has been sketching bikes since the 70s. He's obviously a slightly older vintage, but so passionate and so amazing to work with. His name's Dave Hendroff. And he started working with me at the start of 2017 when we started designing the MVP that I ended up building in Melbourne. And he had never designed something from the ground up before. He had just sketched and drawn things that he, had seen, like Triumph Street Triples and all kinds of weird and wonderful things. And so it was a huge learning curve for me and him at that time to kind of get this relationship off the ground, where he would need engineering input from me, I would provide design feedback from him. And we had what grew into such a collaborative relationship. We were kind of joined at the hip, and I learned a bunch of stuff around design from him, and he learned so much around engineering from me. It was really, and it still continues to this day with future product that we design and plan. So it really is a beautiful thing. So to answer your question in short, we have a dedicated designer, and that's all. And I wouldn't even call him a designer. He's an artist, right? Like, the ideas that he comes up with are just amazing. And he's not a trained automotive designer, which has its pros and cons. But I think the more freedom you give to creativity, the more likely you're going to find, an innovative outcome at the end of the day. It might take you a bit longer, but it's just opens that opportunity.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting phenomena you see. I mean, even like Elon's obviously a much heralded person in this space who wasn't typically from, the space industry or the automotive industry, but having an outsider come in and see things differently oftentimes results in new solutions and new ways of looking at things. And similar to your designer / artist not being trained in that space, they're going to see things differently and perhaps differentiate what you guys do to everyone else.
For sure.
And you did say earlier that the battery technology, compared to combustion engine bikes. Obviously, it's more expensive and whatnot.
Mm.
Now, some consumers might have, say, concerns around durability and reliability, and what are
For
the
sure.
maintenance costs if things break down? How do you think about that
Yeah,
in terms
yeah.
of the Savage Cafe?
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of reliability, that basically comes down to engineering and testing and
Mm-hmm.
real world testing. And then because I think people compare electric vehicles to petrol vehicles and sometimes forget that electric vehicles haven't had 100 years of development behind them.
Yeah.
And so it's going to take time to really understand what phenomena occur that no matter how much testing you do before you deliver product to customers, you just could not have foreseen those issues.
Mm.
And I think that's a place where very well established companies will probably do better than the new entrants. And that's just because they've got decades of requirements and design requirements and failure modes effects analysis and all kinds of weird, wonderful processes that try and minimize warranty risk and recalls and things like that. So,
Yep.
People bag out Tesla for having certain quality issues or needing a recall. And it's like, man, this happens all the time in the automotive industry. And the fact that they've had so few relative to how many they could have had is really a testament to the work they've done. So, when it comes to our bike, we do pretty extensive durability testing. We're still, and that's the last bit of testing that we still want to do. We just want to double check all of our production components. So the testing we did through ABS development with Bosch was insanely rigorous. Like they really, I was frankly shocked that any bike can survive that testing that they do. Like it was harsh. I felt bad. Like it's like a pain in my gut. But we need to put our bikes through that, and the bike survived Bosch really well. The one that went out in 22, and it identified a couple of battery pack design flaws that we had at the time. We fixed those. We haven't had an issue since. So we have some very rigorous testing coming up in the next few weeks, and I think that we have well and truly over-engineered our vehicle. So yeah, that's looking pretty promising. Time will tell. When
Yep.
it comes to servicing and things like that, like with an electric vehicle, if something's going to go wrong with it, it's either going to go wrong within the warranty period, or you're not managing it or treating it well enough, right? And for example, like if you let it go into deep discharge too much or too often, or every charge cycle for your EV is a fast charge, it's like obviously your bike or your car is not going to last as long as
Mhm.
it could. You need to treat these things with care, just like any other vehicle, right? If you have a diesel car and all you put is petrol in it, it's not going to last very long.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's just there's a big educational piece that is still happening, even though they're becoming increasingly mainstream. There are perceptions and myths that are slowly going to fade with time.
Mhm.
They, once designed properly and engineered and tested thoroughly, the reliability is quite high. Maintenance is very low,
Mhm.
which is one of the attracting factors. You've probably noticed that with your Tesla.
Oh yeah.
You don't need an oil change every 6 months. So yeah, I mean that's quite a lengthy response. I hope I haven't rambled on for too long.
No,
But
no, that's
yeah.
all good. But you're absolutely right. So I've had my Tesla for about 5.5 years, and I
Oh
only had
wow.
to I took it in once just to replace one of the batteries, and it didn't cost me anything. Other than that, it's literally just been replacing the tires once there's enough wear and tear, and that's basically it, man. And when I compare it to previous vehicles that I owned, I had a Holden Commodore, I had a BMW E46. Like every
Yeah,
year,
yeah,
there'd be a couple of $1,000s just on
yeah, yeah,
radiators and fan belts and all this sort of stuff. And now it's
yeah.
like, man, you literally don't even have to take it in for a service. It's
Yeah,
a whole
I have
different
to be
world.
a bit careful. Like I don't want to, like being an engineer by training, you train to under promise and over deliver. There's always a factor of safety in there. And so I'm hesitant to say, like, you barely have to touch it. I'm a terrible salesperson, put it that way. But
Yeah, but
it's definitely a
sometimes
lot less
honesty
than
is
petrol.
can be a good sales tactic as well. Not that it's a
Yeah.
tactic or anything, but it just people trust you when you're actually upfront as opposed to just
Yeah.
because the moment
Yeah.
you say all these things as if it's no, this is the way it is, and then it doesn't turn out being that way, then your trust is compromised.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And I yeah, it's just the way I like to operate. And it bites me in the ass sometimes. I'm a bit of an oversharer, and my wife constantly tells me I'm too honest, but I'd rather everybody know the detail and make their own decision and, you know, perhaps even if it's not misleading, feel like they've been misled.
Yeah. Well, you're
But
playing the long game, so you don't want to compromise, your
yeah,
reputation or trust in the short term, especially if you're
exactly.
playing a long-term game. So I've got a couple more questions for you, Dennis, and then we'll wrap
Sure.
this up. But on the topic of AI, now everybody's talking about generative AI, particularly when it comes to applications in the software world. Have you guys started looking at this in terms of your own sort of value chain?
So there is definitely opportunity for AI to be integrated into our back end. So, all our bikes are IoT connected. There's a 4G SIM in there.
Yep.
That's interchangeable, and we send data to an AWS backend that we've built ourselves, which nowadays is pretty commonplace. Luckily, we have an absolute genius behind that, and so there are opportunities to add AI, especially to the data processing, and especially in the world of predictive maintenance. So, for example, if we know that we've got an issue come up in one bike at a certain kilometer range, something can detect or predict that this subset of customer vehicles may experience the same thing and prompt an automatic warning or something. Or
Yep.
I need to learn, to be honest. Software is a little bit beyond me. Like, I trained as a mechanical engineer, taught myself electrical, learned the business world, and I just haven't had the capacity to learn software to the degree I need to. And so that's actually one of my conversations over dinner tonight with our software team, and just trying to comprehend what all the possibilities are, and what they're currently working on. I mean,
Yeah.
I know what the immediate requirements are, but like I said, one of the guys, both our software guys are geniuses, but the guy behind the AWS backend is just an absolute monster. And he's got ideas that I don't even understand. So yeah, we should have a chat again in 6 months' time. Hopefully, I'll have a better answer for you.
That's all good, mate. All good. Well, one final question I'll ask you outside of the world of motorbikes. You did mention earlier you like reading about personalities. You like diving into this, the psychology of people, because it's fundamental to business and entrepreneurship. And I mean, are there any sort of books that have been pivotal in your sort of growth as an entrepreneur that you would recommend to our listeners?
Look, books wise, yes, probably the one that influenced me the most in my early days is How to Win Friends and Influence People. Now, I personally don't like the way it's written, but I really enjoyed listening to it as an audiobook. I found that I could listen; it was very digestible in an audio way rather than reading it.
Yeah.
That was for me personally. So that's probably, from a more general benefit to the listeners. That's probably the book I'd recommend. It's one that I listened to a couple of times before I even realized I was implementing it, and I would probably attribute, and I'm going to call them successes, my successes at Ford, in terms of being able to influence upper management and articulate, my propositions or my points clearly, or, in a large organization like that, when you don't have any authority, it's very hard to get people to do anything because they're so overloaded with work as it is.
Yeah.
So, to be able to write emails and communicate in a way that enables and opens people up to buy-in is just a skill that is so important in general. The other book I can't recommend enough to people, especially in the hardware space that are thinking about, starting something, but that need to consider manufacturing is not many people know about it. Henry Ford has he's got a few autobiographies, but his first one is called My Life and Work. And to me, this thing is the Bible. And I read this over and over. I annotate, I take notes, I think through, individual sentences at times. There are so many gold nuggets in that book. It's awesome. And then finally on the psychology, mentality, philosophy, biology side of things. And I hope this doesn't trigger too many people, but I am a fan of Jordan Peterson and all of his work. I've listened to all his lectures online, twice over. And you still learn things. And I think that was probably one of the biggest, I guess, step increases or it was the order of factor change in my understanding of people, which helped me realize, like if you don't know the specifics about a topic, how can you possibly become good in that field, right? So if you want to be a good leader, you need to be able to bloody well understand people in general pretty well. And I think understanding the fundamentals of psychology and how people think and different personalities and what have you, and how to work with different personalities in different situations. I think that's what makes you a pretty good leader. So yeah, sorry for the long-winded response. I just felt like they're probably the three key things.
Great answers. And did you see Jordan when he last toured?
I did. I saw him. Oh, maybe not when he last toured. Maybe when he first came to Australia. Okay,
Yeah, I think it was like 2019 or something.
Yeah. I saw him in Melbourne. I talked about him all the time, and my wife or my girlfriend at the time was pretty sick, but now my wife. But she took me to see him anyway. So yeah, credit to her.
Yeah, that was great. I think I was there at the Melbourne Convention Center.
Yeah. That was good.
It's just fascinating how you can just get up in front of an audience of 5,000 people and just talk for 2 hours. And it's just funny looking around at the demographic of people in the audience. Like just all sorts of people who you probably wouldn't think would pay, $100 to listen to someone talk about Nietzsche and Carl Jung for 2 hours. But they're there and they're like captivated by every word this guy's saying.
Well, I think, much to your point earlier, I think authenticity has something to do with it. And not just that, but competence. And this dude is an absolute master in his craft, right? Like if you look at his earlier works and his publications and even his university track record, the guy's probably some kind of borderline genius. So yeah, I don't know. I think people really admire that, and I do too.
Definitely, mate. Well, Dennis, this has been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed connecting with you and learning more about Savic Motorcycles. And if our audience wants to perhaps learn more about Savic Motorcycles and maybe pre-order a motorbike, they can get onto savicmotorcycles.com. The bike is retailing for $19,990, 150 kilometer plus range, 3.8 hours charge time, 54 horsepower, only 270 kilos. So you can find that at savicmotorcycles.com. And then if they want to get on board the equity crowdfunding campaign and perhaps own a small piece of Savic Motorcycles for as little as $500, they can do that at equitise.com. Any parting words of wisdom or links or anything you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap up, Dennis?
I think you've summarized it pretty well. The only thing I'll add is, and I'm sorry I didn't mention this sooner, we do have a high performance variant of the C-series as well. So the spec that you went through is the Delta variant, and then we also have the Alpha. So the Alpha is 60 kilowatts of power, 200 k's of range, 0 to 100 in 3.5 seconds, and I think it's 6 or 7 hour charge time, 6 hour charge time. So yeah, that's the last thing I'll say. And yeah, I hope everybody's enjoyed it. I hope I've added some kind of value, and thank you so much for having me.
No worries. Thank you very much, Dennis. And I will add all of those links to the motorbikes and the crowdfunding campaign to the show notes for our listeners. And yeah, hopefully we'll reconnect in a couple of years' time. And at that point, who knows? You guys are a unicorn startup on the front cover of Time magazine and all the rest of it. So all the best with the rest of the journey, Dennis.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it. Take care.
Awesome.
Thanks for that, man. That was really good.
That was
It
good.
was a
Hey,
fun
so I got to
conversation.
know the challenge that I accepted at the start. Were there any questions you hadn't been asked before?
Let me think. Yeah, I think so. Definitely. Yeah, no, there definitely was, especially around the personnel. I think the more entrepreneurship side, it's pretty rare that I get interviewed from someone as a more general conversation who